So I finally got myself an open source scan converter for my Amiga because, believe it or not, for quite a while, I have been using this thing, this Amazon unbranded cheapo HD video converter, SCART to HDMI to HDMI converter. So I've been using this for quite a while. I got this ages ago when I first started getting my retro computers out again. And this thing, I would say, has served me well, but I finally decided to plump for the open source scan converter because this thing has basically has horrendous amount of lag on it. And it's not surprising. I've known that for quite some time when I've been using it, but I've just been putting up with it. But it got to the point where I was like doing a live stream the other day. I was trying to play Lemmings and I couldn't click on the lemming. I literally it looked like I couldn't play the game. I'd be waiting for a lemming to come and I'd click on it when the icon appeared and I'd completely miss it. Right. Come on. You can do it. I missed it. I think that's probably. I'm going to say that's the lag on my capture box. Right. Let's try that again. We've got 8 minutes. Or we've got 6 minutes left. Oh dear. So the lag on this thing had just become too much to bear. And to be honest, now I've used this thing. Really, this has been actually really ruining the gaming experience of like old Amigas and stuff like that. It's generally very sluggish using this. So Retro RGB has got a video on this. I think it's called the worst scaler of all time. So I'll link that in so he does an in-depth review of this. But I thought I'd have my own little look at this and just have a little confirmation that what he found was true. There is, yes indeed, a horrendous amount of lag on this, enough to make your gaming experience bad. The other thing to realize though is that, well, this thing was 5 times the cost of this one. Is this worth it? Yes, if you're going to be doing a lot of gaming, and so yeah, but this thing does work. But yeah, for gaming, can't really recommend it anymore. One thing to mention about this though is this can take composite video and S-video signals. And this thing can't. This thing is RGB only. Well, the Amiga's RGB, so that's fine. So I'll have the Amiga plugged in via the SCART there. The other thing of note, which isn't mentioned in the Retro RGB video, is one of the reasons I picked the open source scan converter is because it's got a separate audio output there. And what I'm doing when I'm streaming is I'm taking the Amiga into here, and the HDMI comes out and gets captured, and that gets sent to the stream. And I'm using the audio out to go to the speakers or headphones that I've got on in the room so that I can monitor the Amiga, and the rest of it, the sound and the picture, goes out to the stream. Now, that's a feature of this. It's also a feature of this HD video converter. So that's quite useful to have this separate audio out on here as well. So it's done on both of these. The only problem is, for quite a long time, I thought I had broken speakers because I've been putting this through a set of tiny computer speakers, and Tiny are a company from years ago. I was putting the audio out through those, and the speakers were really buzzy, and I thought the speakers were so old that they needed recapping, and I even went and bought the caps. But it turns out they don't need recapping. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. The audio output from this has got a horrendous amount of buzz on it, and it makes a horrible noise even when the Amiga's not plugged in, and then it gets worse when the Amiga's turned on. The noise from this is virtually silent. I've got a recording of that later on, which you'll get to see. But for now, I've done some tests of these two boxes just to try and demonstrate the lag to you. I know Retro RGB's already done it, but I've done it myself as well, just to double prove that this thing has got quite a lot of lag on it. So I'll show you that now, and then after that we'll get to the audio outputs, which is pretty bad. So what I've got here is I did a recording of the open source scan converter and the Amazon cheapo converter, and what I've done is I've recorded them on the GoPro at 200 frames per second, and I've just got Turrican 2 here, and that's because Turrican 2 runs at 50 FPS. It's quite a good game to test, and I'm just going to push the joystick button, and we're going to see how many frames it takes to respond. So each frame on this, because I'm recording at 200 FPS, is going to be 5 milliseconds. So I'll take, it looks like Monty Python, doesn't it, where I'll like with the Monty Python animations with my finger coming in to press the button. But as soon as I see the button actuate on the joystick, so I think it's there. So yeah, so the button is pressed. Let's just try it there. So I've actually depressed the button there, and we'll see how many frames it takes before we actually see the muzzle flash from Turrican 2's weapon. And it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 frames, and it took from actually pressing the button to actually seeing something on the screen. So 10 times 5 is 50. That's 50 milliseconds. That's exactly 2 frames. And that's pretty much as fast as you could probably expect a PAL Amiga to respond, because it's 25 milliseconds a frame. So that's 2 frames. It would have taken 1 frame to read the button and process the inputs, and then the next frame you would have seen the output. So probably as quick as you could expect that to respond. So that's with the open source scan converter. If I try the same thing down here, so this is the Amazon cheapo, the HD video converter. So let's see how this one does. Where have I pressed the button? There. Is the button pressed there? Yeah, I think the button's just about being pressed on that frame. So let's see how many frames it takes the cheapo to respond. And it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 20, 29. So it took 29 frames for Turrican 2 to respond to the button press using the cheapo converter. So that's actually quite a significant difference to the OSSC converter. So 29 frames at 5 milliseconds, that's 145 milliseconds to respond. If I subtract the 50 that the OSSC took, it took an extra 95 milliseconds to respond to the input over the OSSC. In computing terms, 95 milliseconds is basically a lifetime. It was a lifetime even in the Amiga's day. And in 1990, 95 milliseconds is a long time. So that's at 25 milliseconds a frame. It's basically 4 frames longer to respond. And you can actually see how much, like, I actually managed to move my finger up by about 2 centimeters in the time it actually took the screen to respond. So I can actually move my body that far in that time. So if you actually watch it at high speed, it doesn't actually seem, it actually seems fine. But what that amounts to is like a really sluggish response to the game. I mean, if I show you the OSSC version of that, you probably wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference. So that's the OSSC doing it at high speed. And here's the cheapo converter. So they kind of look the same, but when you're actually playing, it feels sluggish and muddy, and it's pretty horrible. So I'll try and put these two next to each other so you can have a look at them. There is one problem with this converter box that isn't mentioned on the retro RGB video, and I'll show that next. So what I've done is I've put a microphone in front of the speakers, and I'm just recording the open source scan converter. And that hum you can hear there is probably the microphone itself and the speakers that are on pretty loud. And this is the output at the same level. It's recorded at the same level as the other one from the cheapo Amazon output. Now, this is really audible in the headphones when you're listening to this. So as I've been live streaming, I've been listening to this hum in my ears all the time, coming from that output. And I actually thought it was the speakers that were wrong, but it turns out it was just the actual box itself that was creating the hum. And to make it all worse, if you actually turn the computer off, which I'm doing there, this is the amount of noise it creates when it's not even doing anything. So that sounds like it could be power supply noise or whatever, but I had the OSSC plugged in with exactly the same power supply as I tried this one with. So this is just really horrific audio output. So there we have it. In conclusion, there is no going back, and the open source scan converter is really good. And I really shouldn't have been using that other thing for as long as I was, because, wow, I was just putting up with it. But unfortunately, for a lot of games like this one, Turrican, platform games, you know, it's just 4 frames of lag is just too much, unfortunately. So it had to go. But yeah, I'm really happy with this open source scan converter. Yes, it's more expensive, but because I'm using the Amiga a lot more now than I ever was, really, it's been well worth it. I can't believe I played the whole of Cannon Fodder 1 and 2 on stream with that amount of lag. I could definitely feel it when I was playing. I was just putting up with it. You kind of have to like get used to clicking buttons earlier than you thought you should. So you kind of compensate for a lot, but there's some things you just can't compensate for. So yeah, there it is. Open source scan converter, good. Cheapo, Amazon, whatever it's branded as, Chinese converter, okay for some things, but generally not very good for gaming. So think about that before you invest some money in one of those things. But if you just need to get something working, or you want to see if the screen's on, you know, that's totally fine with that thing. So yeah, these games are much more enjoyable when you've got rid of that lag. 4 frames, I know it might not sound a lot to people who don't play video games or whatever, but it's a lot. It is a lot. So yeah, that's just my little take on it. Confirmed, it does have a lot of lag. Confirmed, don't use it unless you're desperate.